biggest thing that we've seen is actually quite simple. The fact that we have clients that come to us, we work on a sprint, we do work, we are able to show them a prototype of their entire website, and then they want it live and we push it live. Things like that are just, really fantastic.
Okay, hi everyone. I am Ishan Anand, CTO at Layer Zero.
And I'm Mark Mercado, VP of Engineering at Layer Zero.
And welcome to JavaScript Jam. On today's episode, we have two guests from The New Dynamic. They're both a community and an agency. That's something we're going to dig into. Focused on the Jamstack space. They've had a lot of history from the beginning, even before it was called Jamstack. So it'll be a really interesting conversation. So we've got Bud Parr, who is the founder of The New Dynamic, and Régis Philibert, lead developer at The New Dynamic. Hi guys, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, nice to be here.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So, first maybe just tell us, a little bit about your background and then how each of you got into the Jamstack space. And then I'd love to explore kind of, the history of Jamstack from your vantage point.
Yeah, sure. So I actually became interested in Jamstack in 2012, and I had been building websites for quite some time, mostly fairly complex websites and that sort of thing using, PHP software like Expression Engine and that sort of thing. I was working on a big project that had a very complex, content model, and we were going to replicate the project over a course of the next couple of years in different countries and that sort of thing. And something made me just, I had been intrigued by Jekyll. And so this is by now 2013. And I proposed to the client that we save them a lot of money and try this new paradigm out. And to my surprise, they went for it. Jekyll was pretty early in those days, and it ended up being very difficult to implement at the time, but it was fantastic. And I remember back then thinking, oh my God, what have I done to my client? And I was losing sleep at night and that sort of thing, because there weren't really CMSs or anything like that at the time. But they were down with it and it went pretty well. I never looked back. I've never started a new project since then on anything other than some Jamstack, method. So,
Since 2012?
Since 2013, yeah.
Since 2013. So, basically 8 years, almost a decade.
Yeah.
You haven't looked back. So I'm curious, what type of project was this, and why do you think the client was so interested? Did you have to sell them hard? I mean, this is the early days. There wasn't a term.
Yeah, no, because it was a very strange project. I mean, the client was a government entity, not United States government, but a government entity, and they needed to be. It was relatively low budget for that type of client, and they needed to be very nimble with it. They wanted a lot of feedback and that sort of thing, and I was able to show them prototypes very quickly, and it just it felt right. They being lawyers were kind of okay with Markdown, which is what we had. We had these Markdown documents that they were editing in GitHub at the time. And other than a few snafus, they got it, they understood these were documents and that we were publishing those documents and that sort of thing.
So you had lawyers editing Markdown in GitHub?
Yeah, well, they were essentially submitting documents. So they knew each document had to have a title and that sort of thing. And we knew that I had a lot of control over, the output and that sort of thing. But this was to be a kind of a discussion site where they would put up if you've ever seen this in the New York Times, they used to do this thing where they would put up a topic and then they would have, several arguments on that topic and then counter arguments and that sort of thing. They were all related. And then this was supposed to be replicated in several countries and that sort of thing. So it was kind of an interesting fit. And we did the project. It lasted for a few years and it's gone now. But, I really loved having done that. And it was insane to bet the ranch on Jekyll at the time. And I paid the price for that in terms of, having to spend a lot of time working on it. But yeah, it was exciting too.
So, Régis, were you working with Bud at the time, or what was your journey? Your first, introduction to Jamstack, and how did you
No,
meet up
so
with Bud?
my journey was I've been a front end dev for 10 years, and I was mostly specialized in WordPress. As any front end dev, you can work out a lot of front end stuff, but you have one back end framework you're kind of comfortable with, and mine was WordPress. So it was easy to find work, but at some point it started to get a bit boring, I would say, to work in that environment. And I knew about Jekyll. I had tried to set it up on my local machine, but I guess it was not as, lucky or educated as Bud, because I could never have it work. So I passed that static site generation introduction for a few years, and then Smashing Mag started moving their website to use Hugo, and they tweeted about it, and so they introduced me to that new static site generators, and I figured I'll give that one a chance. And I played around with it. It was easy to set up, and it's just instantly worked whenever I edit something in the code. So I started redoing my website with it, my own website, like a lot of people do when they find a new tool. And I just, kind of slowly fell in love with it, started writing blog posts about it, getting engaged into the community for that particular framework. That led me to being engaged in the Jamstack community when I found out there was actually a name for what I was doing. And and through that community, I met Bud, and we noticed each other. And at some point, Bud had some work for me, and I was in the process of, questioning my career as to, like, I'm being bored. I don't want to do WordPress and Jamstack anymore. But it's hard to sell it to clients. I managed to convince one client to do it, but it was a long prospect, and I figured if I wanted to get rid of WordPress, I would never be able to sustain a living right now. And Bud gave me the opportunity, gave me some work, and then he told me, "Do you want to join full time Jamstack?" I said, "Yeah." And now I'm lucky enough to be working full time in the Jamstack it's been 2 years now that we're together, and it's a dream because I don't have to question my career anymore. I can go for another 10 years, and that's actually pretty satisfactory. So yeah.
Bud, you mentioned that cost was one of the drivers for you to adopt Jekyll in the first place.
Yeah.
Was that the main driver, or were there other factors as well?
Well, the way that I had proposed it to the client was because, the software at the time, and we were, of course, kind of running our own servers and that sort of thing. And the software that we had to create multiple sites. So these would be kind of replicas of one site, but, propagated out into different countries and that sort of thing. And so, the software to do that and the servers and to make sure that, we were able to serve this all over the world would have been pretty expensive. And, so the proposal to the client was that, that the hosting was inexpensive, even, as we scaled, that just the cost of setting things up and replicating, so with a Jekyll site, if you need another site or a static site generator, you click a button, you fork the site and you're done. And that's quite a bit different than any of the software that existed at the time. So yeah, I was able to propose it, not just in terms of its benefits, but at the time, particularly the cost savings.
Gotcha. Yeah. And Régis, what drove you to look into static sites in the beginning? What was the kind of genesis there?
Because I'm being a front end, having to deal with the back end was not something I was really excited about. I mean, cPanel, we all know about them, but that was not my trend. And that was, and the biggest crisis of my career was when a server went down, and I had no idea why, because there was a sudden surge in visitors, and because I was not a very trained and, really expert at backend. I had not put in place everything there was. So I just wanted to remove that concern from my own field. And so that's why I wanted to jump into a static site generators, knowing that I would not have to worry about backend, that the end game was just push files up there in the cloud, and your client will only have to download the files to their browser, and that's it. That's really what I was appealed for. Bye.
So tell us a little bit about New Dynamic. As you mentioned, it's both a community and a consulting agency. Where did it get its start, and how did it evolve into what it is today?
Well, so a few things came together. So, at the time in say 2013 and then starting into 2014, this was very few people were into, what we now call Jamstack. It wasn't a thing. The name didn't exist at the time. And a lot of the community was around Jekyll. And then what was the other one? Middleman. And there were a few, they were starting to pop up here and there, DocPad and that sort of thing. And so I felt a need to start talking about this paradigm. I was so excited about it. It really, really energized me. So I started a website, which at the time was thenewdynamic.org. And I started listing a database of different things, there I was putting, this was before Slack existed as well. So I had tons and tons of links to articles. I had a database of various tools and things like that. So it was really meant to bring people, into the space, ease their path into the space. At the same time, I realized that what I felt was broken in my own small, web practice or web agency was pricing. And with all that I could save by not having to manage servers, by not having to manage the infrastructure of, PHP-based websites and all the software updates and all of the, bug fixes and, all of that, which is considerable, particularly if you're a small shop and your resources you have to spread thin. I realized that the pricing was off, and if I were doing everything in Jamstack, I could be doing it on a different basis. So I started the idea of charging people on a monthly basis from the get-go, never a project fee. They just come in, we charge them on a monthly basis. And so I knew at that time I needed to change my agency around. And so I was actually talking to a friend of mine. We were kind of considering working together. And he said, well, I don't want to do this, but I love the name and you should stick with the name. So I just created the agency from the name that I had, because originally the new dynamic was static is the new dynamic. And that's what it arose from. And after a while, of course, I lost the word static out of that name because the connotations of static or the misunderstandings that come from that word. So, so it just kind of happened very naturally after that. And with the exceptional, or once in a while, somebody being confused by it, it's never a real problem. Our clients mostly don't come from, the developers anyway. So they're very separate things.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious about that because we're talking, pre-2016. So before the term even Jamstack was coined and popularized. How did you message to, clients, this is the only way we do things? Like, how would you say no to somebody who's like, I need you to do some WordPress stuff? Or did you have a way that you had created a funnel that's only people who are interested in stuff that you could apply static to? How did you navigate that in the early days? Like going Jamstack only as an agency?
When you're a small shop, people are hiring you as a person. And so they trust you quite a bit with their technology problems. And so it's kind of like, this is what we're doing. And they're either good with that or they're not. If somebody said, oh, we have to be in Drupal, well, we've turned those people away. We've said, we just don't do that. And we've explained to them why we don't do that. And sometimes they'd have a reason or that they needed to be in it or something like that. And sometimes they would, go with whatever we had. And we had, say, when content editor layers came around, like forestry, somebody would say, oh, well, we need to be in WordPress. And I would hold up, the forestry application on my phone and say, you mean this? And it was just an editor, and they would say, oh, yes, that's what we need. Because, WordPress had become kind of a name for CMS, right? People use. So, we've certainly left business on the table by doing that, but we've been kind of fine with that too. I think that for us, finding that right fit is super important because we work with people for years and years and years and years.
You don't feel like you have turned away. You've been fine going Jamstack alone, even in the 20. Like it wasn't a tough slog you'd say in the 2012 to 2016 when people didn't know what it is, and maybe you didn't have all the complementary CMS editors and stuff like that we have today, you were still able to I guess get sufficient enough.
Yeah. There was a product that lasted for a while called Webhook that had a nice editor. So we've used all the editors that have come around, that have come and gone over the years and that sort of thing to work with clients, or some we have some clients that we manage the content for, so they never see anything. They don't know, or and we just explain to them that they're not going to have any problems when they get mentioned in the New York Times or something like that. So that's what they want to see. Most of our clients are very focused on their front end. They like to see their website on their mobile device, and they're happy. The clients that we have that are more technical, and we have quite a few of those, more than likely came to us, for our Jamstack expertise. So those weren't an issue, and we're maybe half and half, or 2/3, 1/3, with more technical clients. So.
Oh, okay. I want to actually talk about the mix of the clients in a little bit, but one thing I do want to cover is, like, you've been at this for a really long time. I'm curious. I think of the whole Jamstack history as kind of like 3 eras, right? There's pre-2016, before the term was coined, and you guys were definitely active then. There's kind of 2016 to 2020, which is kind of, it grows in popularity. And then there's the future, which is basically, 2020 and beyond, trying to adapt Jamstack to large numbers of pages, more dynamic techniques, personalization. The thing I'm curious about is, for that, we've talked about that early era and what challenges were like there. But why do you think in that 2016 to 2020, that middle era we just got through, Jamstack became as popular as it has over the last 5 years? Because we've had static sites, from the beginning of the web. Like Tim Berners-Lee's first page was a static site. What are the key trends that actually enabled Jamstack to flourish, 2016 to 2020 and not in the 90s?
Aaron Swartz coined the phrase "bake, don't fry."
Yeah, yeah, he did. Yeah.
Right.
But yet, even when he coined that, people all agreed with it and then went on using WordPress. I'm curious if you have any thoughts, like what led to the popularity of Jamstack? Why now?
What do you think, Régis?
Well, I think that 2018, 2019 is when we started getting a lot of JavaScript framework that were now able to produce static sites. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for JavaScript. There's a lot of JavaScript developers. There's a lot of React developers. And when, product out of that ecosystem starting labeling themselves as static site generators, and which they are, then that's people get interested. Because you didn't have to go into understanding Jekyll and how it works. You didn't have to go into the Hugo is using its own templating language, which you have to learn out of the box, and nobody else but Hugo users uses it. And so when you tell people, JavaScript, React, and we have that Gatsby or all of the other static site generators based on React that were developed, Vue, then we have Next, or then that people are ready to jump into that wagon, and it takes them like a day to just familiarize themselves with that system because they're very well aware of how the language works. And then they can start pushing towards this. And if, like me, they were bored at their previous, kind of stack, they can jump onto that one easy. And then they can tell their boss, hey, there's this thing, it works with React, but it builds static site generators. And now we've covered the advantages of those files being up there just in the cloud. And we can build this with our current developers because they love React and they want to push this. So that's one of my feeling as why recently it got very popular, because what we've recently talked about more and more is JavaScript-based static site generator, or pre-render, or however we want to call them.
Interesting. Are you surprised by how popular Jamstack has become? Like, if you had been asked in 2016, do you think it'll
No.
I say it's going to take over all of web development. Would you guys have predicted that?
No. As a matter of fact, I remember when Matt Billmon was a guy in forums and that sort of thing, and the stuff that they've created and everything since then is just, like, I was always kind of blown away by that, to be honest. I really didn't think that all of our problems would be solved so beautifully in the space. So,
but I jumped a little bit later. So when I started the Jamstack, Netlify was already there. So for me, and I realized that the future was okay. So for most of the websites of the world are handled well by WordPress, but there are other commonalities that they're simple website. I mean, they have their complexities, but it's a lot of content. There's a few contact forms, and then it's companies, promoting their products, or it's people blogging, or it's documentation sites, or it's huge traveling agencies that have a lot of sites, that have a lot of pages, but it's still just content. And those, they don't have to use WordPress. They can use something as simple as a static site generators. So that was my naiveness, I guess, to think that people would be, tend to use that, and it would fastly become the new way of doing the web. It's taking longer than that. I realize that now, but I'm not surprised it's popular. And yeah.
So looking at that last era, the future era, 2020 and beyond, as I broke it down, where we started getting more dynamic techniques, incremental static generation, distributed persistent rendering, parallel static rendering, all these techniques, people trying to do personalization with logic at the edge. Do you have any thoughts on what key things the ecosystem needs to be solving for moving forward, or what are you looking forward to, or hoping for in the next 5 years of Jamstack?
I'm closely following on-demand builders, or dynamic rendering, which is what we used to do with the LAMP stack. And it's just, I realize that now this becomes the edge case. So you have 10,000 of your pages which are static, or maybe less, and then for some very rarely visited web pages, you can have an on-demand builder building it. And that's something we can achieve with any framework. I mean, Next is making it very easy for you, but if you're not using Next, you can still use any resources from your host, any serverless functions, features that they have to create that builder yourself. It's just about returning HTML. So I'm following that closely, because I really think that in the future, even though static is a very good way to host your website, I think if you have 50,000 pages, maybe pushing 50,000 files in the cloud for every single build is not that ideal. Maybe you should just push 1,000 of those, and the other files which are very seldom used, then you can render them on the fly, like in the good old days. But it becomes an edge case now, and for me, when that paradigm is solved, and it's actually solved, but it could be made easier in many other environments, I'm not seeing any limit.
I believe I think there's a real, argument, and there always has been, for choosing the right tool for the job, so, and of course, in this field, you have to have a limited tool set, right? You can't use every single tool. So we're not building, 50, 100,000 page sites. We had an event at one of our meetups not too long ago, well, a couple of years now. A friend of mine who worked at Bed Bath & Beyond, and he was kind of trying to solve that problem, because they had hundreds of thousands of vendors, bringing in pages on their website and that sort of thing. So, but those aren't, our problems to solve. Our problems, we work with sites in the, 10,000 page range, something like that, product sites or something like that. And there's no problem at all rendering those statically.
No, but
do you use tool-wise, do you use the same framework for all of your projects, or do you use different tools? Do you have a choice over that?
We are mostly focused on Hugo as a tool. Hugo solves some problems for us really elegantly as a business. A key factor in our business, because we work with people over a period of years, we manage a lot of websites. So, we're not always working on the same websites, is that we need a great deal of stability, and Hugo ships with a binary. And so we can build a site and build that exact same site, some years down in the future. And that stability is really wonderful for us. And it's a very flexible tool. And of course, as we all know, it's very fast at building a lot of pages, particularly with, a lot of complex queries on any given page. So not just building pages flat out, but building pages with complexity where there are many, a large site. So it handles that really well for us. So that's our focus. We also use Eleventy, which is a really wonderful tool as well. It can be very simple and grow with you and that sort of thing. We're looking at the new set of tools. But we do tend to stay away from JavaScript frameworks just because I think that for us, for our needs, the maintenance levels would probably be too high. And we can build, Régis can speak to this, but we build React, we build the things that we need to, we can still use React. We can still use all of these tools within our tool set.
Yeah, I will say,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Régis.
No, I just wanted to say most of our projects will eventually need a one page, a tiny web app that you need like a form or a scheduler or whatever. So we use JavaScript. We just don't use a JavaScript framework per se for every single project. Just what you need on the client side.
Yeah, and on the page limit, I mean, we're kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum. Like at Layer 0, we specialize in the guys who have more than 10,000 pages and have hundreds of thousands up to millions of pages. And that's why we tend to be bigger fans of kind of the more dynamic techniques. Is there anything else, Bud, that you see as the future kind of Jamstack over the next 5 years?
Well, in a way, I feel like a lot of what Jamstack is going to be doing is becoming more normal rather than, I'm not to say, like I said, I was very bad at realizing all the problems that could come up that people would have solved, and that's been beautiful. So I'm not good at seeing the future that way. But I do think that the next 5 years will mostly be bringing people into the field, making things easier to, get a full website up and going and that sort of thing. Whether that's, we've seen a lot of interesting tools like StackBit and Tina CMS coming along, and, editing interfaces just seems to be a never-ending problem to solve on the web. And now, when I first started looking at this, there were probably, other than maybe, some obscure really high-end enterprise systems, but the headless CMS space, there were 3 players that I knew of. One of them is still, the dominant player, Contentful. But and now there's, there are countless of these, and so some of that will probably clear out. You can see where people are really innovating in that space, and there's open source tools and things like that. People are solving the problems of monetizing open source. So I feel like the next 5 years is more normalization and making things less niche.
Going back to the present and talking about your work as an agency specifically, what are the kinds of customers that you've been building sites for, or maybe just the kinds of sites in the last 2 years or so? And has that changed, maybe since a few years back?
Well, the change for us, we used to work with a lot of publishing people and that sort of thing, and some media companies.
We still do.
Yeah, I mean, we still do. In terms of bringing in new clients. So the change for us has been bringing people in from the startup area, because I think that the people that they're getting funded by are saying, no, you can't do things the old way. You need to do it this way. And so they're out looking for experts. And so we've gotten some of that business. And our paradigm of working on a sprint basis where people just pay us monthly and we're just kind of always there working for them works really well for them, because they're super busy and they just don't have time to think about their website. So, our client profiles are people who their website may not be the core of their business, but it's central to what them accomplishing their goals. So they need, it's just mission critical. And so they need a team that's always on for them, and they need that stability and scalability and flexibility that they get with Jamstack sites.
So are there any projects that come to mind that presented any interesting challenges, either with using Jamstack or or challenges that Jamstack solved in a really interesting way?
Yeah, there is. I'm not sure that Jamstack solved it, but we found a solution through Jamstack. We have clients who needs regionalization. You call it. Well, you need your content to be adapted to the visitors, right? So based on country. So we have a client who has services in France, in Canada, in the US, and whenever their visitors come from one of those countries, they want that content to be adapted, be it the homepage or the projects they promote, or the language that they use to target certain audiences. And if you're not using the Jamstack, you can do that by server rendering. Like your server is going to interpret where that person comes from and manipulate the page, render it, and send it back. But with static, you don't have that facility. But what you can do is create a variation of files for each given page. And then what we had, the solution was we create 4 different pages, 4 different files, and then we use the logic of the CI, which was Netlify, who has a very intuitive things about creating redirections and permalink rewrites. And then you just tell, all right, that person comes from France, so we're going to serve them that file with that permalink in their browser bar, and they're not going to know the difference. And that was an interesting challenge, is because there's a lot of content fluctuations that you have to handle it with your static site generators and then generate those permalinks dynamically, on the fly at the build. So that was one of the interesting challenges. But now most of the challenges are solved out there, and there's a service that can help you, or so it's mostly about learning new stuff. I think the challenge is you have a given new client that gives you its prerogatives, and then it's about which service you're going to use. Maybe 80% you already know what you're going to do, and 20% you're going to have to find new ways. And it's about learning new services, new documentation sites, new tailor-made JavaScript library, et cetera, and getting yourself up to speed every single week, because it's changing fast. Not only the needs of the clients, they're never changing, but the way they want to do it might imply you need to find out something new. And then you add it to your stack list. Next time you don't have to look for that service or that way, that ingenuity, you already have done it. But it's really about keeping up to date.
And even, we've had other clients who, let's say a client in the Mideast who had the similar but opposite problem. They do business in a bunch of different countries. In some countries, they literally just didn't want people in those other countries to know, certain things that they were doing on their website. So, those sorts of things become mission critical. But also the simple fact that these sites are served on a global CDN, HTML and everything, which is not something that you can do with, the traditional Jamstack site. So there are a lot of problems that we've had to solve like that are, I think, very well tailored to Jamstack. But just really the biggest thing that we've seen is actually quite simple. The fact that we have clients that come to us, we work on a sprint, we do work, we are able to show them a prototype of their entire website, and then they want it live and we push it live. Things like that are just, really fantastic, just day-to-day business.
And I would just add that we never had to say no to any Jamstack requirements. We always found a way. I said no to Bud, but then he would push me and tell me to do it, and just keep trying. And then we eventually always find a way. It's really a construction game, just like any development. So we always find a way.
Yeah, that developer velocity you get is something we hear a lot from our customers as well. It's really, really valuable. One criticism Jamstack sometimes get is there's a plethora of services. Whereas with WordPress, everything was in WordPress. It was plugins that went into WordPress, but everything had that home and had a central pane of glass. The enterprise buyers like to talk about that you controlled everything. And when you move to the Jamstack ecosystem, it's a map of a variety of different services, some that come and go. And I know this came up in the Matt versus Matt debate at the Jamstack conference a few years ago. Have you ever had any reaction or pushback from clients about, all the different services that need to be used, or have you done a really good job kind of drawing the boundaries on which services you rely on?
Yeah, I think that, most of our clients, when we're working with a CTO and they're doing an audit or something like that. And they need to know all the moving pieces and that sort of thing. But I think we ultimately have a pretty good story to tell about, why we're using all those services. The thing about Jamstack, and that is important to us, and I think important to our clients ultimately, is the fact that we're only using the technology that we need. We're not using, where say, we don't like the editor anymore. Well, we use a different editor, that sort of thing. That kind of flexibility really pays off for us. Maybe we're using, AWS for images here, and we get to choose and pick and choose the different tools that we can use as we go. So yeah, it could be bewildering. I gave a talk some years ago on what I called full stack static, which was kind of, imagining all the different ways you could do things. And it thoroughly failed. It thoroughly confused everybody in the audience, and the list of services has only grown. I think it's a legitimate criticism. And of course, we all in this field kind of choose our favorites. We probably more than many, because of our involvement in the community, are really try to keep an eye on all the new services and that sort of thing. And it's a lot, it's a lot.
Yeah.
But they all have great differentiation. It's really wonderful to be able to pick and choose and not just say, okay, this is my editor,
Yeah. Or this is my
really
localization plugin, because
Right.
WordPress has one and nobody likes it.
Yeah. When I did WordPress, I had to build everything myself because I didn't like the plugins that were there, and not everything, but
I'm curious then, we're almost at time. So to wrap up, I'm just kind of curious, as somebody who's, seen the whole history of this space and then keeps tabs on all the new services. What do you think are the most exciting new up and coming services that maybe people don't know about that have got you really interested? Just to kind of close this out.
Well, a lot of what the big thing that I didn't predict was the growth of serverless and how that would really put us over the edge of being able to solve any problem. It seems like serverless has been a little bit quiet over the last year, but I imagine that there's going to be a lot more in serverless, a lot more ways for us to, like companies like TakeShape and that sort of thing that are bringing in, this concept of an API mesh. Gatsby does that really well. I think that that's going to be, the big area for us. So it's not just building a website, but it's making sense of all of these services and making sense of all the data and all those pieces. We're still seeing the CMS space is not stable yet, or that's not really the right word for it, but there's still a lot of growth, a lot of changes and that sort of thing. So we see, companies like Sanity doing really interesting things constantly, and so we're kind of watching all of those. I see companies like Contentful with their, and I think Prismic is doing this now too, with their layers and layers of plugins and that sort of thing. So it really is kind of capturing all that a website can do, and being able to, make that all make sense for a dev team.
Régis, is there anything else on your radar you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the fact that we're using Hugo a lot, and the problems, the fact that we solve problems and then we add it to our stack. So usually we build a Hugo module, which is some kind of a plugin that you can use, and it's going to solve that problem for you. And recently we decided that we wanted to create a Hugo framework, which is kind of, a plugin on top of Hugo that is going to handle all of those little problems that we've solved over the years, and we've compartmentalized them into little modules, but we wanted to bring it to one big software or framework that would solve a lot of problems for people. Because Hugo is amazing, not only because it's super fast, which is very important now that, CIs and hosts are charging build seconds, et cetera, but it also sports its own builder. So you don't need Webpack, Rollup, or Parcel. Hugo will do that for you. It will build your CSS, it will build your JavaScript. And the more people are aware about it, and the more we might attract more users to the framework that are familiar with JavaScript, that want to know that that framework understands their needs for JavaScript. For example, passing data from the framework, from Hugo, to your JavaScript file without using JSON stringifying or whatever. And it's pretty easy to do once you know about it. but it's kind of complicated to set up that builder. You have to understand how it works. It's not as easy as all of the other features of Hugo, which are pretty declarative. It's mostly happening as settings. But with that builder, you need to code that yourself, and it can be a little bit cumbersome. And once you've done it, then you can build your JavaScript, you can build your React app with Hugo, you can build your post CSS using Tailwind, etc. You don't need a rollup or a Webpack. And there's also the SEO. There's a lot of problems we've been solving. That one is critical as well. So that's what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to set up time to build that product, which would be an open source framework that you can put on top of Hugo, so that it would bring Hugo to a broader audience. People who have JavaScript skills, who just want to build the websites, who like the fastness and the velocity of Hugo, but don't want to bother with having to build those complicated building tools themselves. So that's what's next for us, and hopefully will be our new way of doing things, because right now we're relying on a lot of modules, and we think we can bring that into one.
So is that
Huge.
something you're going to be releasing? Huge.
Yes.
I love the name.
Yeah, it's huge for Hugo. It's we want to release it in October in the fall, at least a beta version or even an alpha version for people who love Hugo, who just want to try it out and just have feedback, and then we can roll up something more definitive. But we have a clear idea of how we want to start, and what we want to achieve with it.
And it's designed mostly for people who build, more complex sites for us, but it should really ease the path into, building with Hugo, and kind of a Nux or a Next for Hugo. But so we're excited about that, and it's really kind of about sharing, the problems that we've solved in a
that's the thing,
concerted way.
Well, I'm glad we had a huge announcement here on JavaScript Jam. So you heard it here first. That'll be really exciting. So if people want to hear more about Huge or the new dynamic, what's the best way to find you guys online?
Well, our website is thenewdynamic.com. That's the agency. tnd.dev is our site, and that's where you'll find the link to our Slack, which is where we have a lot of vibrant conversations about Jamstack and food and other things. So that's the easiest way to find us, right there.
Okay, great. And I endorse the Slack. I think it's a very lively discussion there.
Yeah, I love it. I'm there all day. That's my world.
Okay, well, thank you guys for being on JavaScript Jam, and we'll see everybody next time.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.